Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and today's show is about the ancient schools of wisdom. And tonight with me, my guests are Mr. Sidney Schwartz, middle school teacher from Hackensack, New Jersey, and Bible researcher. Welcome, Sidney.
Hi, Tina.
And Reverend Hewitt, founder of Gifts of the Spirit Church and medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
As we usually do, tonight we start out with a topic, which I mentioned is going to be called Ancient Schools of Wisdom. But to get us to what the ancient schools of wisdom are, we're going to talk about a symbol that I'm sure is very familiar to many of you out there, and that is of the pyramids. That is one of the symbols that I'm going to start with, because as I understand, Reverend Hewitt and Mr. Schwartz have uncovered some very, very interesting research with respect to not only the Great Pyramids, and we're talking about the Egyptian pyramids, but other landmarks throughout the whole world. And as this show unfolds, you will see exactly how the connection is made between the ancient schools of wisdom and the Great Pyramids. And throughout the show tonight, we will be live, so you're welcome to call in with your questions and comments. And the number here at the studio is 889-1728, which should be up on the screen shortly. There you go. And so we have been running on pre-recorded shows for a few weeks now due to the holiday schedule and the weather schedule, but we are live tonight. So if you've been waiting to call us about anything that you've seen in the past few shows, or of course anything you're interested in tonight, don't hesitate. We welcome your calls. Okay, now, the pyramids of Egypt. How could they possibly have something to do with ancient schools of wisdom? Who wants to start with that?
Egypt is not the only place there's pyramids on this planet.
Okay.
There's even pyramids under the oceans that very few people know anything about. But first of all, in case somebody just tuned in, I'm clairvoyant. I was born with the gift of clairaudient, which means I hear voices. I've heard voices all my life. When I was a small child, I used to think my parents lied to me because they would say, I don't hear anybody, you know, and that's your imagination, you don't see anybody, you know, that type of thing. And so later on in life, it was proven that I'm seeing somebody and I'm hearing something that the other people can't hear. And so I really found out later on that there are other dimensions, and so I read the Bible a great deal. I studied everything I could find to try to connect with wherever this is coming from. And so the voice, this one entity that was talking to me about ancient civilizations, even before the pyramids, you see, and they told me that the people that lived on the planet here before the pyramids, they used all of their brain. I got very curious about this. And they said that at that time there were no religions on the planet, none at all. And the people that used all of their brain were able to see into the future. It's what is known as remote viewing, seeing in another time, even actually seeing backwards in the past. And when they saw that the future things were going to change, they saw the people's brain shutting down and everything else. They set up the pyramids. They built the pyramids, but they did not build them the way we've been told they were built. They built them with the mind, and the people would gather together in a great, huge circle, and they would use the mind to, it's very hard for me to put this in words, yet I understand how they did it. And they would be able to go beyond the gravitational pull, and they would be able to move the blocks. The blocks would become weightless, just as if they were styrofoam, and move it with their mind. And it was something beyond anything that we understand today.
Basically, what would happen is that the person that we're working on and all the people around would go into a meditative state, and they'd focus on that stone, and they'd visualize. You know, we all know that stone's made up of matter, and that the molecules are always moving. Well, they'd make those molecules move faster and faster and faster, and they would speed up the molecules. They'd visualize the molecules going faster and faster in the stone. Eventually, the molecules are vibrating so fast that it loses the gravitational pull, and with their mind, they could watch that stone go up and move into place. We have a small video clip which kind of simulates how that happened. Obviously, I wasn't there to photograph it. But what you're going to see is a picture of Carl sitting in front of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's the actual stones there. And through Photoshop, I was able to cut one of the stones out and have him levitated to kind of show you what it would be like. So if we could have that clip now.
This is very similar to what they did in those days.
Yes, see what I put that aura around the stone to kind of show that the molecules were kind of moving and stuff, and then it just was placed in with thought. Now the people, you know, there's all sorts of people have always been wondering, well, how were the pyramids built? Because these stones, if you were to stand in front of them, they're gigantic blocks. They're much taller than a person would be. The clip that I made is just totally out of scale, and the fact that it's also lined up in certain ways for astronomically, and what A1 has explained through Reverend Hewitt is that the pyramids were built as a memorial and as a reminder to the people about the soul. He said that if a person sits in a lotus position on the ground, and you were to take a measuring stick and measure the height from the top of their head to the floor, and go 2/3 of the way down, 1/3 of the way down and 2/3 of the way up, you would end up right here, and that's where the soul is. Pyramid means fire in the middle. That's what the word actually means. And the fire in the middle is the soul. And the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza is 1/3 of the way down, 2/3 of the way up. And they built that chamber to represent the soul. And that's the message that all the pyramids have. Even the pyramids in Mexico and other places, they also have a chamber 1/3 of the way down, 2/3 of the way up.
So when they told me to go to Giza in 1991, so I went there and I went up into the king's chamber, and which was quite an experience. And I sat on the floor, and actually I laid on the floor, and I studied the ceiling and everything. And then all of a sudden I realized there was someone with me, a spirit. And then I sat up and I realized that there was somebody, and then he materialized. I saw him. He was right side of me, and it was this entity, called himself A1, the angel without a name. And he explained this whole thing to me, how they were able to move those mammoth stones that was the ceiling of this room. That particular room represents where the soul is in the human body. And then way down in the bottom part of this pyramid, there's a smaller one. Well, in those days when that was built, they weren't sure at that time, but they thought that a woman's soul was where her womb was. And that's why they put that one down there. You know, it was much smaller. But the soul of all of us, male or female, is right here in the very center, right behind the breastbone. But he explained to me that in the beginning of all beginnings, probably billions of years ago, when the gods, that's plural now, were creating the human body, they didn't allow a space for the soul, because the heart itself, which is just a pump, was put under the breastbone out of harm's way. And then when they realized they did not leave a place for the soul, they moved the heart a little bit to the left, and left that space there, which was considered out of harm's way for the soul. See?
Now, one of the first questions that I have, and I don't know if our viewers have any questions with respect to this, is that a lot of what we have been learning with respect to the pyramids and how some of these structures were built would lend itself to the fact that, or the idea that people at that time, or civilizations at that time, were more crude scientifically than we were. So I know myself, I've seen many documentaries on the pyramids being built with some elaborate levers or pulley systems to get these huge stones up. So how is it that if civilizations could do it then, we don't see people doing that now?
What happened was in the ancient times they had a laser light, and they would take that laser to the stone and they would cut it just like a hot knife goes through butter. And that's why the stones in the pyramids, you can't even get a credit card in them. They're so perfectly smooth and so tight together that you can't even get a credit card through. Initially. Now, some of them have moved because of earthquakes, but initially they were really very tightly put together. And that's because the people that built the pyramids were far superior in technology than even we are. They had things that we're just starting to come back to all these centuries later.
You stop and think about it. You stop and think about it. We have this big brain up here, and we only use, according to the scientists, according to the doctors, we only use about 10% of it. But way back there, they used every bit of it. Now, for the viewers watching this program, there are so many chambers there that we do not use. These different chambers carry out different gifts of the Spirit. And so religions came along, and they said, well, that's the work of the devil. You've got to quit that. And so when they were able to put fear in the minds of the people, and they quit or carrying out the gifts of the Spirit, that part of the brain shut down. It went to sleep. And so after many, many years, the brain kept shutting down until now we operate on just about 10% of the brain. That's it. Therefore, we're so limited to what we can do today.
So these structures were built with the use of the ancient civilization's minds.
Yes.
And they built them. You'd mentioned about the significance with the soul placed in the body. Why did they make them like that? Why did they build them like that?
They were actually built as beacons because they had. We think we're so modern today that we've been to the moon and all of these things that we have done. They had ships that they went from planetary system to planetary system.
Really?
I mean that. Just as we travel today from one country to another, they travel from planet to planet. There's nothing unusual. This is not the only planet in this great big space here, in the solar system, in the Milky Way that inhabits people. The reason that they don't show themselves is because they call this the most ignorant planet of all because we have bombs and guns. They're afraid of us, but they are leaving their calling card here. The calling card I'm talking about are the crop circles. That's done by the people. They're so advanced, they can dematerialize, they can materialize their ships and themselves. They're so advanced.
You know, one part of me hears what you're saying, and I grew up like a lot of other people, and I hear speak of alien civilizations, and of course the word alien means something unfamiliar to us, which could mean many things. But I hear that, I hear UFOs. Part of me feels a sense of fear for not understanding that, but yet the way you have just explained it to me, it really seems very natural and very comfortable, as if they're just beings like we are. And yet they, or I should say the beings of that type, comprise the ancient civilizations. Am I missing something with that here?
I think you're on target there.
Okay, all right. And so these ancient civilizations could see into the future what was going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now that may be something that's strange to some of the viewers, but there was a great, I was involved in that back in the 50s, but because I was going to be ordained, they kicked me out of it. That was with the CIA. What was his name? David Morehouse?
Yes.
David Morehouse wrote the book
Psychic Warrior.
Psychic Warrior. Some of the people may want to try to find that. You could probably get it on
Amazon.com.
Amazon.com and read that. he was the one, they didn't want him to write the book, and in fact his life was threatened because he was going to write the book, Psychic Warrior, and he was fabulous at that, because he was able to go into the altered state of consciousness, leave his body, and find some of the military men that was missing. They had been kidnapped. He found out where they were, and they found him there. And he was very important to our government. And but our government didn't want the people to know that they're involved in any of this work. And so many people don't even realize that the word psychic means soul and mind. It certainly does. And they wanted me to be part of this, but when they knew that I was going to be ordained, they kicked me right out. But I knew David Morehouse. He's hiding in Canada with his wife and family now because of writing that book. There's a lot going on. That Russia is involved in this work very, very much. There's 2 books about them, Psychic Phenomena Behind the Iron Curtain, 2 books on that. And those 2, the women that wrote that, 2 school teachers, they're still in prison in Russia for writing the books. It's a very sad thing.
I really, myself personally, doing this show, the more that I learn, or we help our viewers to learn, the more I really don't understand why people are treated the way they're treated. Because the truth should be liberating. And yet, on some levels, there's so much fear and clouds put around this.
If we have enough time, I'd like to say this to the viewers. If the brain was suddenly operational in any of the people, something miraculous would happen to the body. We have a gland right here. It's called the thymus. The thymus is not doing what it was supposed to do. The thymus was created to produce protein for the body. The gland does not produce protein for the body. It stops. It stops when we go through puberty. If the brain was operating 100%, it would produce protein for the body. And when we reach that point in life, when our body stops growing around 19, 20 years old, then when we reach 19, 20 years old and our body stops growing, it would stop aging. It wouldn't age beyond that. And we would always look 19 or 20. We would never age beyond that because the thymus would be producing protein, and nothing will age. No body will age if the body is being fed protein, 100% protein.
Okay.
To relate that back
Excuse me. The body produces acid. That's aging the body. This is coming from another dimension to me.
When the brain goes into 100% activity, then the acid's no longer produced, and your body's producing protein, and that enables your body to rejuvenate. In the Bible, in the 5th chapter of Genesis, I'll read verse 26. It says that Methuselah lived 782 years after he became the father of Lamech, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. He didn't really die; he ascended. It talks about Enoch. They didn't see him anymore. When a person who's living, the brain operational 100%, when they decide they're bored with this particular life, they do the same thing that they did with the stone. They speed up the molecules of their body into becoming faster and faster.
Goes into light.
When they hit the speed of light, there's an explosion of light, and then they're off into another dimension. And when Elisha saw Elijah go up in the chariots of fire, he had no way of explaining this. In the ancient times, they didn't have cars or anything. He had no way of explaining how his teacher was 1 minute here, next minute floating in the air, and then gone. So it was a flying chariot of horses on fire because he saw the light. But he actually ascended. He speeded up his body, and he went into another dimension. And then about 800 years later, he came back and he lowered his frequency down on the Mount of Transfiguration and spoke to Jesus in the same body.
Jesus could not ascend until he came back and got into the body. Even the body was decaying. He came back into the body, and he slowly started speeding it up until life came back into the body. And he kept right on going until the body went into light. That is exactly what he did. He ascended. His mother did not ascend. He told me so.
The Virgin Mary did not ascend.
She did not ascend.
No. She didn't.
No, she did not ascend.
The brain wasn't operating 100%.
No.
See, when Jesus was born, they talk about the Immaculate Conception. And in fact, a lot of that is true, because what he did is what people are doing with cloning today. He went into that egg, and he removed all the genetic material, and he reprogrammed it so that when he entered the body, his brain would work 100%, because neither Mary nor Joseph had the genetics to do that, and their combination of genetics wouldn't allow that. So therefore, he changed the genetics so that he would have his brain working 100%, and that's what enabled him to do all the gifts of the Spirit. Because when your brain's working 100%, each and every one of the gifts of the Spirit are at your disposal. You're able to do them.
Now, you've just, shared with us a ton of information, and I probably have 100 questions. But right now, I'm only going to focus on one. How does any of this have to do with an ancient school of wisdom? What does this have to do with the ancient schools of wisdom?
The way that I understand it is that back in ancient times, although it's kind of like driving a car today, okay? We have the capacity to drive a car, but yet we need the lessons to learn how to do it. The people that had their brains working 100%, but they needed to be trained in how to access and use those gifts the proper way, and channel them, and learn how to use them. So just because the ability was there didn't necessarily mean that they could all do it all the time and do all the different gifts. So these schools were created by the ascended masters as a place for them to exercise and learn how to use the different chambers of the brain that they had available to them, but they didn't know how to use them.
If I'm not mistaken, you have a clip of another school of ancient wisdom.
Yes.
And it maybe involves exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Some type of testing.
In Mexico, Carl and I went to Chichen Itza.
Okay.
We also went to Uxmal, but in Chichen Itza, A1 came through after our visit and explained everything that we saw. And when we were standing on top of the Grand Pyramid and you look out, there's this one section here, and there was all sorts of pillars, pillar after pillar. There were 1,000 pillars there. And that was for this test. People that went to the ancient schools of wisdom went for 7 years, similar to what Harry Potter's now has a 7 years of going to his school of ancient wisdom. So it was a 7-year school. And at the end of every year, you had a test to go on to the next step. I believe one of the first steps was this pyramid, this pedestal test, where you would sit at a pedestal, you would learn to raise your frequency, and you went from the ground until you sat on the pedestal. And so if we could have that clip now, please.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
The person would sit and lean up against the pedestal.
Okay.
And they would go into the altered state of consciousness until their body became lighter than air, and they would levitate up and sit on the pedestal. See this?
Okay. So that was a demonstration of what people would have done at that time in those civilizations.
And if the person, excuse me, if the person went up to the top of the pyramid, if that was their test, that they have to go into the altered state, and they had to go to the top of the pyramid during the time of the altered state, and if they lost their focus halfway up, they would fall. And of course, later on, they'll find their bones at the bottom, and then the scientist or whoever it was that recorded later, they'd said that it was they would cast the
It was human sacrifice.
human sacrifices. They would throw them down and they would kill them at the bottom.
Okay. In the clip there, we tried to show the light going off. He lost his focus, and then he fell down. He fell down the pyramid to his death. Now, this was his test at the 7th year. That you had to levitate up the pyramid to the very top. So
no human sacrifices occurred.
No.
So all of these skulls and bones that they're finding, that all these scientists are very certain that that's what occurred here, did not occur.
That's right.
That did not occur.
Okay.
There was no such thing as that. That's what the scientists said. They didn't know. They didn't know how it happened.
Okay. All right.
There was another. There's a place there at Chichen Itza. There's also a huge well You could put a house in it, such a big well. And there were several underground rivers that came together, and it was like a big whirlpool where these rivers came together. And these students that were all in an altered state of consciousness would be marched. They would be listening to the teacher, the instructor, and they would be marching, and they would go down the steps and go into this big pool, which was deep. And then as the water would be going around this way, and it would spill over a dam, and they would fall way down underneath the earth and go way down where it was dark, underground river. And if they came out of that altered state, they would come out into a lake, drowned. But if they stayed in that altered state all the way through, they would come out at the other end and they would have passed the test. But if the ones that didn't, they would be drowned. They would have failed the test.
Those are pretty tough schools.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know many people who would have made it.
At Uxmal, there was another test that we saw where there's this big ring that's there, and they used to say it was like for kind of like a basketball game where they would pass the ball through, but it really wasn't. What they had to do was they had to change their state of consciousness and levitate through that ring.
Yeah.
You know, to levitate horizontally through the ring.
Without touching the sides.
Right.
So what you're also saying is that many of us failed these tests. The ascended masters at that time saw what was coming. They left, and they said they're going to come back at another time?
Yes.
Is that
When-
truthful?
Reincarnate.
Reincarnate. Okay.
When Carl and I visited Chichen Itza, anyone came through and told him told Carl to tell me that I had been there before and I had taken that test and I didn't make it. I lost my focus. I had no problem going up the pyramid because I wasn't really looking, but coming down I was going nuts. It was very difficult for me to do that and it was from that past life experience.
Welcome back, Sidney.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I'm almost speechless. That's hard to believe, but I'm almost speechless. So these ascended masters, some of which have moved on to other planetary systems,
Right.
they're watching us.
Let me just, I had another thought.
Okay.
If you go back into history and read about when the Spanish people came over and conquered Mexico, they went right into Mexico City, and the leader there, I don't remember his name, it might have been Quetzalcoatl, I'm not sure, but he welcomed the Cortez in because in their history they knew that the ascended masters had light skin. They were Caucasians. They had a light skin, so they knew that this light, and they promised to return. So they thought that this great God was coming in to reteach them again, and instead it was their conquerors and their oppressors. But that's why they were welcomed into the city, and they didn't fight them.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
because of this legend, and it goes back to these schools of ancient wisdom.
So now, these schools of ancient wisdom were not religions of any sort.
No.
Not at all. And, I mean, you've talked about gifts of the Spirit here, and I know that one of the cornerstones of this program is that we've learned that gifts of the Spirit
It's a natural thing.
are natural things. Okay.
It's all natural.
And that people can access these gifts now. In
Yes.
fact, there are people who do that. So I suppose that would lend itself to be possible then. And these ancient civilizations, they lived on this planet thousands of years ago, tens of thousands ago.
Tens of thousands, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago.
So this is pre-Jesus.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I think our culture still focuses so much of Jesus as being the beginning of so many things.
Right.
Jesus
Yeah.
was the 16th Savior God that came to the world.
16th.
16th Savior God.
Very interesting.
If you really study that, and we're going to do a show, not on the television, but we're going to do a show at the Gifts of the Spirit Church in March or April. We're going to talk about it sometime here, and it's called The Naked Truth. And this is done by some scientists that Spirit told me that the Spirit voices told me that they would see that this is put in my hands. It was put in my hands 2 weeks ago.
Really?
I have watched it. It is mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. And these people have been led to do this in order to get the truth out to people, because we are the world, this whole world, this planet that we're on. We're in a time here that's been prophesied for a long, long time, that we're in the end times, which means the end of an age. And the world can't go on like this. People are not getting the truth.
You're not being a doomsday predictor, are you?
No, I am
You're not talking about an Armageddon of sorts?
No, people have been misled.
Okay.
This is why this is shut down. They have not received the truth.
So it's going to be the end of what?
End of this age of ignorance.
And
what it is.
the beginning of what else?
This is why I've been told to create the make known the unknown. This is why you're involved. You were behind this too. This is why you came to us and wanted us to do this program. I never told you that. I've told you that on this program. I was afraid you'd run the other way if I told you. Too many people do that.
I haven't run yet. Thank you. So we've got structures all over the world that we're finding out new information about.
Absolutely.
In fact, Carl and Sidney are asking the questions. Carl's getting answer through spirit sources, and he and Sidney together are traveling the world, and you're finding the truth about all of this.
Yeah.
You know, this just brings to me a thought of how many different structures throughout the world that don't have any explanations as to their existence. And you can only wonder. Things like Stonehenge, and I know that you had mentioned something about that, or you've traveled there. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, I had traveled to Stonehenge many years ago. In fact, I have some pictures that can be put on the screen at this point of Stonehenge. It's quite a miraculous sight to see, because these stones are so tremendously big. They're megalith, and they've been there for forever. For a very, very long time, and people have wondered, where, how they were there, who made them, and so forth. Perhaps we could have the next one.
There we go.
Yeah, we can see some of
They're monstrous.
They're
How tall are
monstrous.
they? How many stories would
maybe
you say?
50, 60 stories. No, not 50, 60, 5 or 6 stories.
Okay.
Yeah, 50, 60 feet.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, there's a man you can see there at the base of the
all
one.
right. That gives a
to
good
give you
idea.
some
My
idea
goodness.
what that is. Maybe they're even taller. The Stonehenge was so popular that people would go there and they started to deface it, so they put a fence around it, so you couldn't really walk up and really get a good sense.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
you're kept away from it now. For the longest time, people wondered where it came from and who built it and stuff. And I happened to be looking at this book that's in my library at school about Stonehenge, and they go and they talk about some of the theories of and the purposes of Stonehenge. And one of the things it says here was that giants built it. Another thing is that Merlin's magic, he magically did it. Then they go on to say that the devil made it. They went to Ireland, and this woman had these stones, and he swindled the stones from this woman, and on and on and on. And but the funny thing is that what Awan has said can't be found in this book at all. He basically said that Stonehenge was a landing platform for the UFO spaceships, for the Ascended Masters to come and visit this planet and then to leave. And here's a video clip that I created to try to simulate it.
Now, these are roughly the shape and the way they are laid out at Stonehenge.
Yes, this is what it looked like initially. Before, a lot of them have broken down. The stones are standing in complete circles, but they're not all there.
Now, a lot of our viewers are going to be watching this, and it's going to seem very strange to them. I have to tell you honestly.
Sure.
They're going to have a hard time believing this. I know, because of my connection with you and many of the things that I've learned with you, that your research is sound. You ask a question, you find the answers. In fact, a lot of times you're actually very critical and disbelieving a lot of what you're being told, and you go sometimes with the focus of disproving it, only to find out that it in fact is true. If, for example, Awan had mentioned something to Carl about an
Right.
answer to a question.
Right.
And so I find that very interesting, that you're stumbling upon all of this and unveiling some very, very cutting-edge information, if that's the best way to talk about
Well,
it.
the time that I was listening to this person talking to me, and I said, I want to know who you are. And said, it's not important. Message is important, but who I am, the message is not important. And this went on for a long time. And then I'm very stubborn because I want to know. I don't want anybody to fool around with my mind. And so it finally came in 96, I believe it was. And then in 99, he said, I'll prove to you who I am. And that was when the picture came in with Judas kissing him on the cheek. I couldn't believe that was him. And then the following year, but then he explained to me that we knew each other before. He was a scribe years ago, and he was the one that I was told about in a reading about 30, 40 years ago, that he would be the one writing the book. I'm not a writer, and and that he would appear to prove to both of us. His mother's not too happy about all of this. Oh Lord, don't forget she's Jewish, and there's a lot about what's going on here she don't know about. So when she and I talk, I don't tell her anything. I don't tell her anything.
So
But anyway, he proved to me who he was, and then the second picture, he came through, and he's pointing out another place I got to go to. And so all of this has been proven to me, and then just last week with this business trip that I went on, then my father proved to me some things that I have never found out, and I've often wondered about, because when I was in the womb, my father moved 8 times while I was in the womb in 9 months, because he thought the voices that he was hearing was the voices of the devil. And so he kept moving in these different houses because he thought he was running from the devil, you see. They were telling him about the baby that was in the womb and what this baby would do eventually. And so right after he died, it was 12 years after he died, he spoke through a trance medium to me and told me that he didn't know me until he died. He found out the minute he died, there were so many people that had preceded him, told him all about me. But now I got all the rest of the story 2 weeks ago. So, Jesus says, knock and the door shall open, ask and you shall receive. I knocked the door down. I've asked so many questions. I got all of my answers. I really did.
thank you. Speaking of asking questions, we are live. Our show format is 1 hour live. So if any of you have a question for Mr. Schwartz or Reverend Hewitt tonight, do not hesitate. 889-1728. The topic tonight is Ancient Schools of Wisdom, and we are showing how many of these mammoth structures throughout the world, such as the pyramids, Chichen Itza, Stonehenge, are actually, or were actually, ancient schools of wisdom.
And we're really just touching the surface, because you could study the Oracle of Delphi, you could go to Easter Island, where ancient schools of wisdom in the Far East, they were really all around the world. And we just mentioned a few of them here tonight.
There's some of the pyramids are going to be pushed up to the surface in the oceans because they went down because of the earthquakes under the oceans many, many years ago.
You know what that makes me think of? That makes me think of Atlantis and the whole mystery surrounding that whole piece.
Yeah, that was.
Have you found anything out about that?
That was a continent that went down. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So that was a real place, not a
of course it was.
fantasy
Yes.
place.
That was not created.
According to what Awan said, when Atlantis existed, the sky was always cloudy because there were no oceans, and the Earth was surrounded in this cloud mass, and the whole world was like 72 degrees all the time. There was no winter and everything. But the Atlanteans were playing around with laser lights through a red ruby, and they were trying to kill some monsters that they created, some dinosaurs or whatever. And the laser light went up, passed through the monster into the atmosphere, and it caused some sort of chemical reaction, which started the rains coming. And those rains were like the deluge, like you read about in the Bible with Moses.
That was the floods.
That was the big floods. Now, all ancient civilizations have flood stories, and not just the Hebrews. And they're all quite similar. And that's when the oceans came down and flooded.
Filled up the deep.
Filled up the deep.
And
There was no oceans before that.
There were none on this planet.
No. And eventually the seismology, the plates moved again, and Atlantis went under.
It's just like Venus is today. It's covered with clouds. Our planet was covered with clouds. Nobody had ever seen the sun. Many people on the planet went blind because they were looking directly in the sun. They didn't know better. They went blind because of the bright light.
That's fascinating. So you're taking us back to our planet in its infant stage,
Yes.
or its womb stage, if you will.
Yeah.
And Earth was not covered with the oceans that we
No.
see now.
Not originally.
It rained for a long, long time, and then when it stopped raining, of course, this is why out in Colorado and places like that, you could still see the line of where the water was, you know. This country, he said that this country we're in now was all swamp for a long, long time, just pure swamp.
The lines you're talking about the Grand Canyon, I assume. You're talking about these,
sorry,
you can
yeah,
see the
yeah,
lines
yeah.
from the
Yes,
Grand
Right,
Canyon.
right.
Isn't that
And they said
something?
this whole country of North America was all swamp.
Now, there was something that I wanted to clarify because we have mentioned, or you have mentioned this name several times, and for those of our viewers who are just tuning in for the first time, they've heard you mention AWAN. And if you haven't been watching these shows, it probably would sound confusing to you. But AWAN is really an acronym for Angel Without a Name.
Angel without a name.
And that source is in the spirit world.
Yes.
And that's the source who spoke to Carl, and that Sidney transcribed and turned into your first book,
Right.
which is called My First Encounter with an Angel. And that's what I wanted to clarify for some of our viewers.
A1's one of the Ascended Masters.
Okay. And that particular entity did not want to have a name, did
Right.
not want to be worshipped or
No.
turned into something, because he wanted people to think for themselves.
Exactly.
And so he just said Angel Without a Name, or
Right.
it just said Angel.
We have quite a story to tell about a young man who came to see me with a gun. He had a gun hid under his coat. And we have quite a story to tell about that at A1. A1 would not read for him unless he was in the office too, so it's quite a story to tell.
Okay.
So we will not use that person's real name. We'll use another name, but this is quite a story. We're going to tell that on one of the other programs.
Okay.
Yes.
Good, thank you. I look forward to that. So again, I call out to the viewers. If you have any questions you've ever wanted to know about the Great Pyramids, Chichen Itza, Stonehenge, yourself, rather than just being fed what we all see on television, about these being sites for massive ritual burials or sacrifices, which they are not, we welcome your calls and we welcome your questions. And perhaps because this is such a shock to a lot of the information that many of you out there have been reading and learning your entire lives, maybe it's just enough for you to listen to it too. And we're okay with that as well. I realize that there's a lot to absorb. This isn't something that I grew up with, and certainly it can be difficult for some of you to grasp out there too.
It does take a while to absorb, but it can be quite startling at first.
And likewise, if there were questions from other shows that our viewers wanted to ask about, that weren't able to ask about, they're welcome to call in now to speak to Mr. Schwartz and Reverend Hewitt. And again, we are live at 889-1728 on this very cold and blustery night.
That's for sure.
Okay, now, we've talked about the ancient schools of wisdom. These civilizations, the people's brains were operating at 100%. Their brains became shut down over time because of religions.
Because of
Religions.
That's what I'm
when
understanding.
they created the devil.
It was interesting. At one point, I had gone to Yale University, and I found this book which actually said that the priests would claim whenever someone wasn't listening to them or just trying to disobey them, that they would claim that there was an evil one, and that the evil one was working through that person. They were talking about the devil. They would label anyone as a devil worshiper who would just be disobeying them. And this is the power that they held. Anyone used to call them tyrants, because they wanted to chain people's minds to their dogmas, just so they would keep coming every week with money in their hands to give over to the priests. The end result was that they made the people afraid of the gifts of the Spirit, and when they stopped using these centers of the brain, they atrophied. So several years ago, I fell down and I cut the tendons in my hand here, and I had to have an operation to have them reattached, and I was in a cast for 6 weeks. I was really shocked when it came off. I couldn't move those fingers at all, and that was just 6 weeks. So imagine for thousands of years we haven't used these brain centers. It's genetically programmed for them to be shut down.
Why don't we have schools of ancient wisdom today? Why aren't we starting all over again? Now that we know this, why aren't we learning from this and starting again, or giving it another go? What's going on?
It's a very slow process, the Spirit told me. Very
Okay.
slow process.
Plus, you have to realize, could you just leave your family and leave your job and go live somewhere for 7 years? Times are so different. Our society is so different. We're not structured that we have that kind of freedom in our lives to do that. I mean, if you went away for 7 years, who would pay your taxes? Who paid a mortgage on your house or your rent on your apartment or whatever? So it's difficult. And in a lot of the cases, unless you have this complete separation, it's hard to bring these gifts through, because there's a lot behind using these gifts, because so much of the energy is invisible. It's so much dependent about how we think is also ties into this. That the way it works is, if I'm sitting here and I'm trying to levitate the glass on this table, okay, and I'm working real hard at it, and you're sitting there saying he can't do that, well, I can't do it then. It doesn't matter how hard I work, you're going to stop me with you saying no. So this is why people have to kind of go into these kind of retreat things, almost retreat from the world in order to develop these. Now that's not 100%, but we're talking about some of the if you wanted to ascend and do these really the peak of the ice, the more difficult types of these gifts, this is the way it is.
Now, Reverend Hewitt, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually have students who come to your school and you work with them to try to develop them.
Yes, I do.
Could you call that a sort of an ancient, a type of a school of wisdom, maybe not ancient, but a school of wisdom of some sort?
Jesus selected his students because of the auric field that he saw around him, the light. You see, the soul puts out the lowest frequency of light on the planet. And as having second sight, I can see the light around people. And I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. The people that have the dimmest light are usually the people of the clergy, because they're closed-minded. Dimmest light. Some of them I've seen can't even hardly see the light. And Jesus picked these people out. There was only 4 of his students. 3 of them were really very good, Peter, James, and John. And if you read the Bible, when there was some big event, some great phenomena that he wanted them to witness so they could take it on to the people in the future, he would have them go. For instance, he wanted them to witness who it was he was in communication with. For instance, you've heard of all the ones that are with me. Well, he wanted them, Peter, James, and John, to go with him in a special night when he was having a healing service. He left all of those people there. and plus the other students, these other 9, and they went up further away from him up in the hills. And that was when Moses and Elijah materialized. Now, here's Moses, who had been dead 1,400 years, and here's Elijah, who had been dead 800 years. And to the people that's listening to this program, and they've been taught that you've got to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior to be saved. I want you to think about this. Who saved those two? Who saved Moses and who saved Elijah? My God, they'd been dead for hundreds of years, and yet they materialized and appeared in front of these 3 students and Jesus and carried on the conversation. Who saved them? They were still alive. He has told me that everybody lives, regardless of whether they have a belief system or not. I have a knowingness system, and that takes guts to say that. I have a knowingness system. I have no belief system. I got rid of that years ago. I don't believe that garbage that they teach. There is no such thing as the devil. They made that up. They made that up in the 325 in the month of June. And they kept that up, and they still keep it up. But they keep the money pouring in. And there's no such thing as a person paying enough money to pay a ticket and get into heaven. There's no such thing.
You know, I've always thought it was strange throughout different places in the world, either that I've been to personally or that I've studied. When you mentioned money, it made me think of this. We'll see very, very, very poor countries with very, very, very elaborate cathedrals and churches.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But then some people would
Golden
say
altars.
that's because everything that they give is to this church, and this church is everything for them. It will save them, it will help their lives, their loved ones, it will heal them, it will do all of this.
You see, I've been in denial for a long time, and they wanted me to go to Europe, to go to some of these cathedrals, and I wanted him to go because he's the photographer, and he drags all this equipment around, and he's also the computer man. And so we went to this one place, and I didn't want to go. I've argued with these entities.
I didn't want to go. You got so angry and depressed, it was unbelievable.
Oh, I did. We went to this one cathedral, and we got in there, and there was this archway inside from one part of the building to the other, and there was all this whole archway was little baby skulls all the way around, real ones. I got over there and looked at them real close, because they had told me that years ago they would tell these young couple that just got married that the road to hell was paved with the skulls of babies that were never baptized. I didn't believe that. And they insisted I go to this place in Europe to see this, and I wound up there.
It was in the Cathedral of Narbonne in southern France.
In France.
Yeah. We were in another French cathedral in Sacré-Cœur in Paris. And Carl got so upset because he saw all the people dying, falling off the scaffolds, and they just threw him in a pit. And they had so little concern about the workers there that he refused to go in. He got really upset that time.
That's unbelievable. I mean, we could talk about cathedrals. We could do just
sure.
one show about the different cathedrals I'm sure that you've seen and visited. That's phenomenal.
Yep.
And the children who weren't baptized were the ones.
They brainwash these people. That the taller the building, the closer to heaven.
Really?
And the spirit people told me there is no one on this planet that can forgive you your sins. No one. My own brother proved that, because he was rotten to me all my life because, you know, I was weird and all of this, and he tried to drive a wedge between my father and myself, and he goes into spirit in 1973, and he came through that time that my father came through, this trance medium, and he was crying, wanting me to forgive him, and I says, is there anybody over there that can forgive you? Because, see, I'm trying to find out. And he says, there's no one over here that will forgive me. Then I started asking questions. Well, is Jesus off of is he going on strike? Isn't he over there? Yeah, that's what I was saying. Did he go on strike? He can't forgive me. I'm asking you to forgive me. I've always asked questions. I'm not afraid to ask questions because I know there's no boogeyman.
And you know, that's really the foundation for the show,
Sure.
is talking about the answers to the questions
Yeah.
that you weren't afraid to ask.
Right.
And
Not
our
me.
viewers hopefully aren't afraid to ask questions either.
There's a
And
lot of them are.
we only have a few more minutes that we're live on this show, 889-1728. We will continue to be live the rest of the season, and it's a 1-hour show. So put together some questions and thoughts. We'd really like to hear what you think out there about all of this, as I'm sure for some of you it is shocking. For some of you, you probably think we're the weirdest people you've ever met. Of course, I can assure you that's not true. We would like to hear the comments about this show. And I have more questions this evening. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left.
I got some wonderful calls at the church.
You did.
Yeah.
That's good. So people have been watching this program and have called you as a result of it.
They've called the church, but they were disturbed because the church had, I mean, the cable system here had not gotten around to changing the label that this program
Right.
was coming under the witching hour.
Right.
They got shook up that
Right.
this is under the witching hour.
Yeah,
I
that-
was shook up too.
That's a good point. There was a scheduling labeling problem, I should say, whereas the show that was on prior to this in this time slot was referred to the witching hour, and it wasn't changed on the TV guide, Adelphia TV guide, but we now have it changed. So for all of you who rely on that to see the schedule of shows, you'll now see that it's changed to Making Known the Unknown. And with that, I thank my guests this evening, Mr. Sidney Schwartz
Welcome.
and Reverend Carl Hewitt.
My
And we'll
pleasure.
wrap up another show. The show was called Ancient Schools of Wisdom. This is the Series 2, Ignorance is the Mother of Devotion series. And we look forward to you joining us next time. Until then.